Hi, thanks for watching. Okay, today I kind of want to contradict myself. Okay, yesterday I made a video where I talked about how a lot of cluster B could arise from a fundamental, sort of a fundamental constitutional belief where we sort of fundamentally are confused between well being and well feeling. Okay, I want to kind of challenge that because I think that's probably in the neighborhood, but maybe not exactly where I think I want to land with cluster B. Okay, so you could look at the yesterday's video as like a rough draft, and over time I kind of want to revise my thoughts because I actually think it's not quite so simple with cluster B. I think there's something a little deeper, actually even deeper, going on below even beliefs. Okay, and it's a nice idea, but I think it's deeper. Okay, so instead of talking about the difference between well-being and well-feeling, okay, I think we need to go a little more extreme, and we need to talk about the susceptibility we have in cluster B to perturbations, disturbances, and the supernormal. Okay, I think we need to speak more in terms of the supernormal and perturbations. Okay, so basically, what I'm thinking now, and I'm revising this every day, but what I'm thinking is that let's go back to the dialectical process. Okay, I think maybe something that needs more attention in psychology is the whatever the mechanism is in our neurology and our behavior, where we are able to sort of reflect and sort of let things weigh on us and let dissonances exist in us and just sort of bear the burden of deliberation. Okay, reflection and deliberation, and just thinking of it as kind of a burden. Okay, now I think that's probably a natural psychological process. Okay, but I think if you think of it as like an organ, it's not really an organ. It's sort of like a process in the brain, but it's like a process that's sort of like the liver of the brain. Okay, where we sort of process our thoughts, or you could think of it as like the kidney and the liver of the brain. It's sort of like the processing, the reflection and processing that operates to sort of give us a little bit of buffer so that we're not just flash reacting and just reacting too quickly. So think of that circuit. It's like a circuit in the brain. Think of it functioning sort of as the liver of our deliberations, or sort of like the deliberative liver of our mentation, let's say, our psychology. Okay, so uh, just having that kind of reflection, that's just going to kind of like filter out a lot of impure, maybe rash ideas and sort of blend them together so that we sort of get a more refined pixelation of our behavioral awareness. Okay, so I would call that the organic dialectical process. Okay, I don't think it's one part of the brain. It's probably different parts of the brain communicating, but that process operates kind of like the liver of the brain. Effectively, that circuit sort of does the job of sort of filtering our thoughts and just kind of refining our ideas, and also sort of acting as a buffer, okay, to prevent us from being too impulsive. Okay, and also it acts as a buffer to keep us from actually having very polarized thoughts. So you might say that the splitting and the polarization that we see in cluster B is almost like what would happen if you just took that dialectic out, just remove the dialectic, and then you get this really crude, really cartoonish, really kind of odd, sort of way of thinking where you're too polarized, too extreme, and you're too prone to acting out in ways that are not in your best judgment, or even evaluating things in life, evaluating yourself, not with the best criteria, because your means of criteria are sort of disabled, so that you don't have a fine pixelation in order to judge and to estimate and to evaluate things. And so it's a very disabling thing not to have that dialectical process. Okay, so even though it is a circuit, I think probably involving different parts of the brain. Okay, I think we ought to think of it effectively as kind of like an organ. It's sort of like say like the liver, but it is a process. Okay, and I'd like to propose that maybe what it is with cluster B is I think we probably just have a very weak and a very delicate dialectical process. In other words, our dialectical process is very robust, and it's very easily disabled in the face of just very small perturbations or supernormal experiences. Okay, and to make matters worse, okay, I think there can be like a feedback loop where if we get too much into, like, say, the super normal, like very intense experience, very pure experience, very unmitigated experience, okay, that has a way of kind of disabling the dialectic even more. Okay. Now, my theory is that if you don't have cluster B, or if you don't have ADD, or if you don't have like an addictive personality, even in supernormal experience, you're still going to retain a baseline, maybe a very low baseline, but some baseline of dialectical processing. So my theory is that for people that have ADD, cluster B, and addiction type stuff, I think they're all kind of in the same neighborhood. I think probably when you get in the face of perturbations, arousals, supernormal experiences, I think our dialectical processing goes very, very low, almost bottoms out. So I guess we could say that our dialectical function, our dialectical circuit, is just not very robust. It is fundamentally a weakness in that dialectical area. Okay, so it's an aspect of functioning where we're very easily degraded or drowned out. Okay, by by, let's say, perturbations or supernormal experience. Okay, and then the supernormal experience, by its nature, it sort of is sort of like an abandonment of the dialectical stuff. So if you don't have dialectics as like an unconscious process that's automatic, okay, you're not going to even want to recover your dialectic when you slip into the supernormal. Okay, so like just imagine if you're somebody who has a weakness for gambling. I've been a gambling addict. You get into the casino, you start to feel that feeling of you want to sit at the table. It seems so exciting. And there's some point where you don't even want to recover your dialectical process, because who wants the burden of having to weigh the pros and the cons when you just are feeling excited, So the excitement sort of disables the dialectic, and then we're sort of in a frame of mind where we're not really even wanting to recover it. Okay, but so basically, you could say that people with cluster B and ADD, we have a more delicate and a more easily degraded dialectical circuit. Okay, and so what I'm thinking is that okay, we have a more degraded dialectical circuit. So what I'm thinking is that a delicate dialectical circuit. So the idea I have is that someone with cluster B, just very, very relatively small perturbations, annoyances, I would say stimulations, supernormal experience, that just has a way of taking much more of that dialectical process away compared to regular people. So on the other hand, okay, I think that regular people with a much more robust dialectical process, I think their dialectical process is unconscious and automatic. Okay, it is so programmed into them that it is just instinctively automatic and it's ever present. Okay, I think with cluster B, okay, I think oftentimes we have to use our willpower and we have to wish ourselves to take on the burdens, and it's not automatic. Okay, so in other words, it's like the difference between having a car that drives by automatic transmission and another car that is, stick shift, conventional transmission. Like what do they call stick shift? They call it manual transmission. Okay, so basically, on top of having a weaker transmission or a weaker dialectical process, those of us who have the ADD and the cluster B and the addictions issues, our dialectical process is manual transmission. It's not automatic. Okay, so that's unfortunate, but and I can even tell you, just in the last 24 hours, I've had moments where I've had little moments of feeling kind of like fantasizing and being aroused by things that are very like super normal for me. Okay, like I have a weakness for gambling, and I do have a weakness for attractive people. Okay, and I don't think I'm a full-blown sex addict or anything, but I do have weakness. In other words, I think it's part of the narcissism. You have a weakness for attractiveness in other people, like seeing good-looking people. And it was something so simple. I was watching like a YouTube video, and one of the people in the video was so attractive, and it wasn't like I was personally attracted to that person, but because I have the NPD, I was kind of wowed by their attractiveness, and it sort of flipped a little trigger in me, and it's almost like it just opened up that supernormal kind of intensity, and it had a way of kind of like disabling my dialectical whatever, and of course I try to be very committed to take on the burden of the dialectical process, but it's like I found myself like not finding it, like where is it, like I lost it, and so I guess because I'm in recovery, I know the emergency procedure. I just have to sit tight, not do anything, don't trust anything, just let things come back. When I'm disabled, I just need to give myself up to maybe 2 days, and things just kind of come back. I guess I sort of overtempt my engine or whatever. It has to come back down. Um, there's no magic formula. When I get revved up, it takes a while for me to rev down. Okay. But basically just to say that, in my daily life, I have little experiences that just completely disable my dialectical process. And I'm reminded that I don't have automatic dialectical process. Okay. There are times when it gets unplugged, and even to recover it, I might not actually be able to recover it completely right away. I might have to kind of mechanically go through the motions and just know that in a couple of days it'll come back, And yes, for me to have true dialectical processing where I'm really taking on the burden of all the dissonances and all the issues of life without making fast decisions, and just reintegrating that circuit of reflection, and deliberation, and taking on the weight of the issues. Okay, that circuit of the brain. For me to recover that, I really have to cool down. Okay, and the supernormal experiences and the arousals and the, what do you call it? The perturbations. The perturbations. They have a way of kind of spiking me out, where I kind of lost it, and I don't have the automatic sitting in the reserve, I don't have that automatic dialectic. I have a manual dialectic, and it can get put out of gear, get knocked out of gear. So, yeah, I guess it's important to know your weaknesses. I think as narcissistic people, I think we tend to be very attracted to, attractiveness, status. We all have our little buttons, um, and I guess you just have to take the bumps in the road and stay for the long-term commitment, and just know that, we don't have the automatic functions that regular people do. And we have to use more of a manual, sort of a manual function. And we have to be very committed to it. And also understand that every day is not going to be the same. We're going to have some better days than others. Not every day is going to be a good day. And some days you just have to chill, go through the motions, and just wait for a better day, and just trust and believe and have the faith, that it'll come back, So basically, I kind of want to revise what I said in the last video about the well-being versus the well-feeling. I think that's a very cartoonish, very simple way of describing cluster B. And I think more than likely what we really have is we just have a very delicate dialectical process that can get knocked out more than other people who have a good baseline dialectic. We probably don't have a very good baseline dialectic, or if we do, it gets knocked out just by very relatively small perturbations or arousals. Okay. And even worse, if we live in a state of chronic arousal or a chronic perturbation, imagine the worst thing for someone with ADD or cluster B is to have actually an addictive lifestyle, or let's say a sensate lifestyle where you're sensation seeking and living on pleasures and gratification. Okay. So, if you're in the habit of just constant gratification, then you're almost like constantly disabling the dialectical process. And it's not even a question of ups and downs. You just have no dialectical process. And that could be maybe what we could call like the chronic state, of the personality disorder. Like in my case, I've had chronic periods where I've been like years and years, just chronically overactivated, and just really no real dialectical processing. Okay. But in other parts of my life, I've had pretty good dialectical processing, but I kind of go through ups and downs when I get sort of, like they would say in Scientology, when you get inturbulated, when you get perturbed, or you get aroused into, let's say, supernormal experience, And so it's a very delicate game to play. And I think it probably, I take a lot of inspiration from, like, say, the Gamblers Anonymous 12-step group, because they don't have the luxury of, like, say, when you, if you're like an alcoholic, you just have to stop drinking the alcohol. But when you're a gambler, there's a lot of patterns in life that arouse the gambler in you. There's a lot of things, like, for example, if you're a gambling addict, just watching a lot of YouTube kind of brings up those patterns. And so it's not so easy like an alcoholic where you just don't drink. If you have a gambling addiction, there's a lot of things in life that will stimulate the gambling brain. Okay. And so, I take a lot of inspiration from people in those programs like Gamblers Anonymous or even Sex Addicts Anonymous, because they deal with much more insidious stuff where you could just you could just start feeling sexually aroused, or you could feel just some weird feeling, and already you're losing your sobriety without doing anything. Okay. And so I think that's the same with narcissistic. I think we have a very degraded, very, very delicate dialectical process. And I think that very small perturbations, very small arousals can sort of knock us out. And if we happen to be chronic, we will first, before we can recover our dialectical process, we first have to cool down off all our bad habits. So like, say, if you're living in a situation where you're chronically in gratification and chronically, you're in, basically kind of an addictive pattern of life, a lifestyle, before you can even begin to work on all these techniques, first you just have to cool down. So you have to go minimal. You probably have to go like months or even like 6 months. I had to go a few years, actually. It took me 4 years to really cool down when I went minimalism. Okay, so I discovered minimalism by accident, but it took me a few years for my body to just cool down to where I could even have practice with the dialectical process. So that was really, I just had to be patient. I had faith. At that time, I just believed in minimalism, and I wasn't even really sure why I did. I think I had some spiritual reasons at the time, but I just believed in it, and I just knew it was the right path. But I had to wait a few years before I could actually incorporate meaningful dialectical practice. So I feel so bad that psychology doesn't have this more of a trainer's mindset, more of a coaching mindset to cluster B, because I think a lot of people could be helped if they could just get on a program to first just cool down, okay, and then sort of develop a new set of beliefs and a new set of practices, and then just sort of be able to monitor, when you're losing that dialectical process, and then just having faith and just going through the motions, just having your routines and recovering slowly the dialectical process. Because I think that, that's the part that makes us human. And I think those of us who discover it realize that life is much better when you have that buffer and that dialectical process. And here's the other thing. I think for anybody who has issues with anxiety, with erratic emotions, with dysthymia and stuff like that, I think the beauty of having this strong dialectical process is that when it's well integrated and it's processing, it sort of acts as a big buffer to sort of stabilize our mood. It's probably like the ultimate mood stabilizer, okay? Because it just has a way of just keeping us sort of on even keel and just sort of in a constant state, I would say, of semi discomfort. Okay, so yes, I'm admitting that when the dialectical process is ongoing, it is kind of a chronic state of discomfort, but it's the discomfort that stabilizes us. It stabilizes. And we learn to associate well-being with that chronic, uneasy state. Okay, it's a little bit boring, uncomfortable, and it's very weighty because we're weighing a lot of issues and we're letting a lot of issues weigh on us without disposing of issues. So the baseline for dialectical processing is kind of a sort of a steady discomfort. But when we take it on and we take on the burden and we allow the burden to be associated with well-being, not well-feeling, but well-being, okay, then it's sort of like a machine technology that operates amazingly to sort of stabilize the mood and just to keep our, just kind of buffer out, just erratic feelings so that, I personally have a lot of anxiety. But when I really take on the dialectical weight, the burden of the dialectic, okay, my anxiety does go down. Okay, so I can testify that in my case, it is a mood stabilizer. And so there's so many benefits on top of making it easier to work, and you become more productive and you become more responsible. You get into less trouble, you get into less issues. And so in the end, it's very profitable. And it also makes you more professional. I became more professional as I got into that. So um, it has tremendous benefit, but it also acts as the great mood stabilizer. So I just wish that psychology would take on more of a training, coaching approach, where what we're looking at with cluster B is regaining fitness. Fitness. It is not a thing where we just have chronic, indefinite, just a bad brain. It's not that. It's just that we need extra fitness, extra motivation, extra fitness, and extra training to sort of get ourselves sort of tuned up. It is really, to me, a question of training and fitness. And I think this stuff about, just talking about how I feel about my mother and how I feel about my childhood and how I feel about the abuse and all that. I mean, I'm sorry. I know it comes from a good place. Okay. But I think we in cluster B, we need training and fitness. Okay. Because and the most important thing is that even when you're trained and fit and you're on the path to recovery, we have a tendency to get into relapse conditions where we start to lose our sobriety, which is our dialectical processing. Okay. And so then the question becomes just holding tight. It's like an emergency procedure. If you're a pilot, a professional pilot, or like a test pilot, you have certain emergency procedures where you know exactly what to do when you lose an engine, or you lose a hydraulic system, or you lose electricals or whatever. In this case, we lose, let's say, it's like losing the electrical system. Okay. And we just have a method. We know exactly what to do. Okay. We just chill out. We just continue with our routines. We just remember what is important to us, and we sort of ask it to come back, and we take as much burden as we can until the dialectical process just comes back. And we accept it happily because we know that baseline of discomfort, that groaning, boredom, whatever, just take it on. That is the ultimate mood stabilizer, and it's very profitable for us. It will bring us profit if we invest in it. Okay, you got to invest in it. It's not new age thinking where you just wait for things to manifest. You invest, and you invest. And so it's not a fancy. It's not some kind of woo-woo, new age manifesting fantasy. It is the real deal, where you take things on and you invest in your life and in your environment. And the other thing I can say is that it also takes away the ego in a sense, because when you really get into the burdens of the environment, you're investing more of your identity in the environment and not in your separated self. Okay, so that's another byproduct. It stabilizes mood, but it also puts you in touch and integrated with the larger environment, so you're not a separate entity. Okay, so it has a way of taking away that, call it the ego. So, I mean, I can't say enough good things about it, but I want to be a little more realistic that the things that cause it to degrade is not just a bad belief system, but it's also, I think we have a weaker dialectical system. And I think, small perturbations, supernormal experiences, and, just arousals, they tend to kind of disable very, very quickly our dialectical process. So I think we have to respect the fact that we have a very weak and a very vulnerable dialectical process. Okay. And that the worst thing we can do is live a gratifying lifestyle, or like say an addictive lifestyle. That is just, I don't even see how you could possibly expect, any kind of recovery. And so, I feel bad. I hope in some future that psychology will look more towards training and fitness, developing our fitness mentally, and look at cluster B, ADD, and addictions more like we require more fitness. We have to have more of a program, and we have to really be like athletes, and really deliver ourselves into a serious program and really work on extra fitness. We have to be extra fit. Just like if you have a little bit of diabetes or whatever, you got to be in extra good shape. You got to really get that exercise. You got to really watch your diet. We're kind of like that. It's like a type of diabetes, if you want to call it that, just in the analogy. It's not to say it's exactly the same thing, but definitely with cluster B, we have a weaker dialectical process, and it's more vulnerable, and we lose it more easily. So we really have to do a lot in our lifestyle and the way we design our lives and live our lives and how we practice our lives, okay, including our energy levels, okay, because for us, we need to have, kind of watch the stimulation. Stimulation is not good for us, just like it's not good for ADD, People with ADD need to really watch stimulation, and they need to go to the place that they hate the most, which is boredom. That's where you find the dialectic, but it won't do you any good until you calm down. And it may take a couple of years to get yourself calmed down. So if I were to design, let's say, a training program or like a coaching program, if somebody's already like smoking a lot of cigarettes or just in a lot of gratification, a lot of social life, a lot of just living that gratification life, the first thing we'd have to do is get into a minimalism plan and sort of allow a few years for the whole energy of the body just to calm down. Okay. Because you got to get calm, and it takes, and the body's revved up. So it takes a while to get that down, to get that baseline down. And then when you're in a more calmer place, then you start working on really incorporating the way of life that is dialectically heavy, a burdened dialectical life, where you really take on and you integrate yourself with the tax burden of the environment, and you start to become identified more with your environment and not with yourself. Okay. And I mean, that takes time. You got to believe in it. You got to believe in it. And then you got to take a few years to really get into it. But that would be kind of like the coaching plan, I guess, or the training plan, and maybe instead of a psychologist, it might be better just have a personal trainer, because this is really about mental fitness is really what this is about. And unfortunately, yeah, we do have a condition because we have a very weakened dialectical process. Okay, so that is a condition, but with training, I think it's kind of like having low grade diabetes, where, if you just get into the exercise, get into the diet, get into the fitness, you can beat it and you can really live a good life. Yeah, it'll be difficult, but it's the good kind of difficult, and there are good kinds of difficult out there, so I just put it out here, put these ideas out here. These are ideas for people struggling with the same thing that I struggle with. And, I wish the best to everybody. And I just put out my experience and the hope that it'll be kind of like a 12-step, like 12-step experience for cluster B and ADD, but like virtual YouTube version, but obviously the best thing for us to do would be to have like co-sponsorships where people could like sponsor each other and give each other that support and really kind of coach each other, And so I think in the end, I think this all has to be done through community. And I hope that people, especially younger people, I hope they do that, because I really think it's worth it. And I think in some ways we can end up healthier than normal people because we have to be extra good shape. And I think, I think we can really get over this stuff if we're committed to it. And I think we can end up at least in as good a shape as normal people, and in some ways maybe better. Just like, how deaf people, like I've seen deaf people, they become like, blind people. I've seen blind people, they can become expert piano tuners because they can't see, they develop extra good hearing, So like say, because we have a weakness in the dialectic, we might have to develop extra good practices. And we might become very, very dialectical, even philosophical, So I think there's a lot to look forward to, but you got to stay calm. Don't get too grandiose, But I think we really, first of all, just need to get ourselves calmed down and get ourselves like connected with like co-sponsors or, peer support, and just develop plans and live and commit ourselves and live into those plans. And I think there's a lot to look forward to in life. And I think it deserves to be motivating. Again, I'm just very sorry that psychology doesn't emphasize that, but I really think the answer for a lot of cluster B really is fitness and a program and training, training and fitness and just practice, So I really see it as a challenge just to get very, very healthy. But it takes a lot of effort, and it's not sitting on the couch and talking about how I feel about anything. It is really getting into a program of fitness. And I believe that with my whole heart. Okay. I wouldn't say that. I'm not saying this just to be controversial. I say it because I've tried everything, and I had a terrible experience in therapy, and there was finally something that worked for me, and it wasn't therapy. So I'm just putting it out there. So I really appreciate you guys watching, and I wish the very best to everybody who has cluster B, ADD, addiction issues, or even adjacent anger management issues.